Community, good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out Poisoner in Chief, Part 2. The chapter is called Operation Midnight Climax. A platoon of U.S. Marines drudging along a mountain path in Korea came under a sudden mortar attack one afternoon in the end of 1952. Lieutenant Alan Macy Dulles, son of the Director of Central Intelligence, was hit in the arm and back. Refusing evacuation, he led his men forward until another shell exploded near him. A piece of shrapnel tore into his skull and lodged into his brain. Close to death, he was taken to a hospital in Japan and then to the United States. He suffered permanent neurological damage, and although he went on to live a long life, all of it was spent in institutions and under the care of others. Like many men of his class and generation, the CIA director had distant relationships with his children. Nonetheless, his son's traumatic injury deeply affected him. He took the same interest in alternative treatments that any father would. Despite for a way to bring his son back to the semblance of normal life, he corresponded with specialists at psychiatric clinics in the United States and Europe. By early 1954, he wounded warrior was at Cornell Medical Center in New York City under the care of the neurologist named Harold Wolf. Soon after treatment began, Dulles summoned Wolf to Washington to discuss the medical case at hand. As their conversation continued, the two men found much in common. Wolf shared Dulles' fascination with the idea of mind control. He had developed a theory woven from various disciplines that a combination of drugs and sensory deprivation could wipe the mind clean and then open it to reprogramming. He called this human ecology. Dulles thought Wolf might be useful to the CIA and sent him to Gottlieb. Wolf was eager for CIA sponsorship. He wrote several research papers for Gottlieb. In one, he proposed placing people in isolation chambers until they became receptive to the suggestions of the psychotherapist, showed an increased desire to talk and to escape from the procedure, and broke down to the point where doctors could create psychological reactions within them. In another, he offered to test special methods of interrogation, including threats, coercion, imprisonment, isolation, deprivation, humiliation, torture, brainwashing, black psychiatry, hypnosis, and combination of these with or without chemical agents. Gottlieb was intrigued. All the more he became Wolf, had access to a steady flow of patients, made it clear that he was willing to use them as unwilling subjects. He proved every proposal Wolf submitted. The experiments proceeded for several years at Cornell Medical Center at a cost of the CIA of nearly $140,000. Patients were told that the drugs they were given and the procedures they underwent were essential to their treatment. Wolf's chillingly ambitious purpose was to study changes in behavior due to stress brought on by actual loss of cerebral tissues. Other researchers were conducting equally harsh experiments for Gottlieb, but he and Wolf forged a special partnership. In 1955, they conceived the idea of creating a research foundation that would pose as independent but actually be a conduit through which MKUltra money could be given to physicians, psychologists, chemists, and other scientists. Gottlieb had already established foundations of conduits. But with his empire of sub-projects expanding so quickly, he wanted one of his own. It emerged as a Society of the Investigation of Human Ecology, with Wolf as its founding president. All of its funds came from the CIA and made a few small grants to support projects of no apparent intelligence value, but those were intended only to preserve deniability. Every major project it sponsored was Gottlieb's. Soon after establishing this bogus foundation, Wolf reported that he was using it to fund experimental investigations designed to develop his techniques of offensive-defensive intelligence. Potentially useful secret drugs and various brain-damaging procedures will be similarly tested. Gottlieb was one of those colleagues. John Kitzinger, the chief of CIA psychologists, shaped the foundation's research agenda. Kitzinger later said that the environment it funded were in the areas of influencing human behavior, interrogation and brainwashing. One of his first sub-projects the society commissioned was an intensive study of 100 Chinese refugees who were lured to participate with the promise of fellowships, but were actually being tested to see if they could be transformed to return home and commit acts of sabotage. After 1956 anti-communist uprising in Hungary, the society funded a series of interviews and tests among Hungarian refugees to determine the factors that led people to rebel against their government. Later, it paid for a study of how sexual psychopaths repress secrets and how they can be made to reveal them. The range of its other projects reflected Gottlieb's unflagging imagination, studies of the Mongoloid skull, the effect of owning a fallout shelter on foreign policy views, and the emotional impact of circumcision on Turkish boys. Tests to determine whether interrogators could use isolation, anxiety, lack of sleep, uncomfortable temperatures, and chronic hunger to produce profound disturbances of mood and excruciating pain, and research into trance states and activation of the human orgasm by remote electronic means. As MKUltra reached its peak, the Society of the Investigation of Human Ecology became the principal portal through which Gottlieb lured talented scientists into his sub-project Netherworld. Then the American Psychological Association convened for its 1954 convention at the Statler Hotel in New York, where Frank Olson had spent the last night of his life. A year before, one of Gottlieb's officers was circulating through the crowd. He reported back that the several hundred papers the attending scientists presented, one seemed potentially valuable to MKUltra. That paper and the talk that the author gave in presenting it described a series of experiments aimed at testing effects of radical isolation upon intellectual function. Students volunteered in these experiments, paid for by the Canadian Army and conducted at McGill University in Montreal, were blindfolded, fitted with earplugs, and had their hands and feet bound into foam rubber mitts. Each was sealed into a small soundproof chamber. Within hours, they became unable to follow trains of thought and broke down within a few days. None lasted more than a week. The paper's principal author, Dr. James Hebb, asserted that these experiments provided direct evidence of a kind of dependence on the environment that has not been previously recognized. This research attracted attention at the CIA. The Office of Security issued a memo telling interrogators that total isolation had proven to be an operational tool of potential. In 1955, the CIA mind control enthusiast Morris Allen sent a report to Maitland Baldwin, a surgeon at the National Institute of Mental Health, describing an experiment in which an Army volunteer had been locked into a small isolation box and after 40 hours began crying loudly and sobbing in the most heart-rending fashion. Baldwin was thrilled. That experiment, he wrote in reply, suggesting that the isolation technique could break any man, no matter how intelligent or strong-willed. As CIA scientists looked more deeply into his work, Hebb had done at McGill, they discovered that one of his colleagues was pushing his experiment further in the coercive direction that especially interested them. In 1956, this remarkable physician, Ewan Cameron, can anyone call James Cameron? We got bones of Traficani at the bottom of the ocean. Anyway, to continue on with this story, Ewan Cameron published a paper in the American Journal of Psychiatry describing his adaptation of Hebb's psychological isolation. He reported experiments in which he enclosed patents on small cells, placed them in a clinical coma using hypnosis and drugs, including LSD, and then subjected them to endless repetition of simple recorded phrases, like Kathy O'Brien talks about 3 times, and it's entered into your subconscious. To continue, most intriguingly, he compared his patients' responses to the breakdown of the individual under continuous interrogation. Cameron was born in Scotland, lived in upstate New York, and commuted to work at McGill, where he was chairman of the Department of Psychology and director of an affiliated psychiatric hospital, the Allen Memorial Institute. Colleagues considered him a visionary. When Gottlieb recruited him, he was both president of both the American Psychological Association and the Canadian Psychiatric Association. The focus of his research, the particular nature of his experiments, and the fact that he worked outside the United States combined to make him an ideal MK Ultra contractor. Many psychiatrists of that era considered talk therapy to be the most promising way to disrupt patterns and shape the human mind and human behavior, but Cameron rejected it as too slow and unreliable. In his experiments, he sought to learn whether it was possible to stun mentally disturbed patients out of their afflictions by exposing them to extreme heat, subjecting them to electroshock, and even in one extended experiment, placing them under intense red light for 8 hours a day over a period of months. He called this repatterning and believed it could create brain pathways by which he would be able to reshape his patients' minds. If we succeed by inventing means of changing their attitudes and beliefs, Cameron wrote, we shall find ourselves in possession of measures which, if widely used, may be employed in freeing ourselves from their attitudes and beliefs. Most of Cameron's patients suffered not from crippling mental disorders, but from relatively minor ones like anxiety, family trouble, or postpartum depression. Once they made this fateful choice to come to Allen Memorial Institute for help, they became his unwitting subjects. Some went on to suffer far greater physical and psychic pains than those that they had come to cure. Cameron began his treatments with extrasensory deprivation. He gave patients drugs and put them into a semi-comatose state for periods ranging from 10 days to 3 months. What produced what he called was not only a loss of space-time image, but a loss of all feeling. In more advanced forms, the patient may be unable to walk without support, to feed himself, and he may slow down, show double incontinence. To cleanse unwanted thoughts from a patient's mind, Cameron used a technique called psychic driving, in which he administered electroconvulsive shocks that reached 30 to 40 times the strength other patients used. After days of this treatment, the patient was moved to a solitary ward. There, he or she was fed LSD and given only minimal amounts of food, water, and oxygen. Cameron fitted patients with helmets equipped with earphones, onto which he piped phrases or messages like, "My mother hates you," repeated hundreds of thousands of times. In professional papers and lab reports, Cameron reported that he had succeeded in destroying minds, but he had not found a way to replace them with new ones. After completing his treatment in one patient, he wrote with evident pride that the shock treatment turned to then 19-year-old honors students into a woman who sucked her thumb, talked like a baby, demanded to be fed from a bottle, and urinated on the floor. Other patients disappointed him. Although the patient was prepared by both prolonged sensory isolation, 35 days, and by repeated depatterning, he wrote in one report that although she received 101 days of positive driving, no favorable results were obtained. Gottlieb recognized Cameron as a potentially valuable research collaborator, but did not want to make the approach himself, nor did he send another CIA officer. Instead, he dispatched Maitland Baldwin, whose position at the National Institute of Mental Health gave him an aura of professional eminence. In Montreal, Baldwin followed the recruiting script Gottlieb had given him. First, he confirmed Gottlieb's impression that Cameron would make a fine MK Ultra collaborator. Once assured that he had found the right man, he proposed a deal. He suggested that Cameron apply to the Society of the Investigation of Human Ecology for funds to carry out more intensive experiments. Cameron did so. His application was quickly approved, and he set off on what Gottlieb called Subproject 68. We're going to end here with Subproject 68 and the work of Baldwin and all these cats. And tomorrow we'll be talking about Albert Hofmann and who invented LSD. I think they're lying about it. From what I understand, Dr. Hoffman invented it, and it was stolen from him by Timothy Leary. We'll be reading about that another day, so if you like and enjoyed my stream at all, Please like and subscribe. Have a nice day.